delighted to have with me here on the podium the opening speakers, welcome speakers, Marie-Laure Salles, Director of the Graduate Institute, Ambassador Felix Baumann, Permanent Mission of Switzerland here in Geneva, and Gloria Gaggioli, Director of the Geneva Academy. And I would like to give directly, Marie-Laure, the floor to you for your welcome remarks.
Press, no? Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Felix. Good morning, everybody. Dear Ambassador Baumann, dear Mr. Sisekuro, dear Gloria, dear Felix, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a very warm welcome here at the Graduate Institute in the Maison de la Paix for this 2021 annual conference of the Geneva Human Rights Platform. The Geneva Academy and the Geneva Human Rights Platform are part of the broad family of the Graduate Institute, and as the not so new anymore director of the Institute, I'm very happy to be able to be here today at the beginning of this yearly meeting of the platform and to be welcoming at least some of you in physical form. Let me start by extending a number of warm thanks. First, thank you to Gloria, to Felix, and to all the team of the Academy for all the important work they are doing in general, but also for the preparation of this conference. I would also like to reaffirm today my deep appreciation of our close collaboration here as elsewhere with the University of Geneva, a collaboration which is, if anything, I am just hoping to be reinforcing in the coming years. Let me also thank, last but certainly not least, our events and organizing teams at the Graduate Institute. Since the beginning of September, and we were talking about that, they've been on a very dense, very busy schedule. I think we have all realized over the last weird 18 months that the Zoom technology is useful, but that we are definitely losing something when our social life and intellectual life gets reduced to virtual interactions. Hence, since the beginning of September, we've never had, I think, in the history of the Institute, such a density of events, most of which are at least hybrid, if not fully in presence. And this has generated, obviously, a lot of work for our team. So I want to acknowledge that today. For the last 18 months, too, the pandemic and its management have had sometimes drastic consequences for our human rights. This period has exacerbated still further inequalities and their consequences to a vital point sometimes, as when we're looking at the world unequal sharing of COVID vaccines. When inequalities progress, human rights regress. I guess we're getting as close to a mathematical equation here as possible in social science. Whether or not exacerbated by COVID and its social and economic consequences, illiberal governments are on the rise in too many places, with again the tension this implies for human rights. Finally, we know by now the Janus face of digital technology, an amazing connectivity on the one hand, but on the other hand, they are revealing themselves as powerful tools of fragmentation, hatred, and even paradoxically, mechanisms to limit and to muzzle our freedom of expression, action, and movement through the surveillance potential that they represent. Even a right that is particularly dear to us at the Institute, the right to education, has been put at risk over the last month, arguably, with here again a significant degree of intersectionality with classic parameters of social and economic inequalities. The more socially and economically privileged one already is, the less the disruption of the education experience. And the reverse obviously is true, which is, by the way, one of the clear mechanisms through which inequalities increase further, but more importantly, become more structural as they ground from the start a new generation, making it much less likely that they can extract themselves from their starting social and economic position through the lifting mechanism that education should represent. Hence, human rights and their projected universality have never been so much under threat from many different directions, from the weakening of a multilateral system on the one hand, from the strengthening of illiberal national logics on another, with the COVID pandemic putting oil on the fire, as it were. And this is why we've never been so much in need of science-based discussions on trade-offs and new forms of challenges that are threatening some of the important progress that have marked at least part of the 20th century. There's no better place to be having those discussions than in the context of this annual event of the Geneva Human Rights Platform here in the Maison de la Paix, so closely connected to International Geneva, itself an integral part of Geneva and of Switzerland. Human rights are moving targets. They are aspirational goals, more important than ever and more in risk than ever. To strengthen and reinforce them, we need to create deeper connections across regimes and between layers from the global to the most local. This is where the expertise of the Geneva Human Rights Platform is particularly key. And this meeting will focus precisely, if I understand correctly, on the connectivity challenges between national human rights actors and an international system of human rights. The question has never been as urgent and important. Again, a big thank you to Gloria and to Felix for putting such a rich program together. I'm sure you will have very rich and very interesting debates in the coming day. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay for very long, but I really wish you very warm and rich discussions. And I think I'm giving the word now to Ambassador Baumann. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Salles, and indeed.
Sorry, I took your...
No, indeed, over to Ambassador Baumann, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Director, dear Felix. It does not happen that often to have two Felix on the same panel, so it's a particular pleasure. Madame la Directrice de l'Institut, Madame la Directrice de l'Académie, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is really a pleasure for me to be here today for the opening of the 2021 Annual Conference of the Geneva Human Rights Platform. And as the director just said, indeed, it's an extremely busy time currently. For example, last week, we had the Human Rights Council, the WIPO General Assembly, the UNHCR Executive Committee, the JESDA Summit, to name just these as events. So also for me, please apologize, I will have to leave you right after my intervention, unfortunately. So you have decided this year to devote your annual conference to the issue of the connectivity between national human rights actors and the Geneva-based international mechanisms. And I really believe you have chosen a very timely topic, because in fact, national human rights actors ensure that discussions and decisions at the UN are informed by realities on the ground, and that a full range of perspectives are heard. And the other way around, they also contribute to strengthening the impact of the decisions taken in multilateral forums by disseminating and informing relevant stakeholders on the ground. Switzerland acknowledges the important work played by human rights defenders, civil society organizations, and national human rights institutions and their contribution to the functioning of Geneva-based mechanisms, whether the Human Rights Council, special procedures, investigative mechanisms, the Universal Periodic Review, or the treaty bodies, as well as their collaboration with international organizations. We are very conscious of the value of the information that civil society actors provide through research, communications, complaints, and advocacy. Not only do they bring our attention to early warning signs and to patterns of human rights violations, they also make structural and specific recommendations, for example, in the UPR. Most importantly, they maintain the link between Geneva-based mechanisms and institutions on one hand, as I said before, and the ground and affected individuals on the other one. In order to ensure that this connectivity is a positive one, there are also two key challenges. And the first one is maintaining space for civil society to be able to do their work at home. And this is a critical feature of our own support abroad. If there is no safe and enabling environment at home, then the participation of national human rights actors with Geneva-based mechanisms will be difficult, maybe even dangerous. National legislation restricting civic space, for example, can have a chilling effect on the engagement of civil society organizations with international organizations. Unfortunately, we do see a shrinking space for civil society in many parts of the world due to domestic legal and administrative provisions, such as national security and counterterrorism legislation, and other measures which have sought to or have been misused to hinder the work and endanger the safety of civil society. Switzerland, we use our bilateral channels to advocate towards other governments for a safe and enabling environment for civil society. And we are committed to protect directly people that are dedicated to the defense of human rights. And we have updated our guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders. Among the many tools we have at our disposal, we have, for example, we have the démarches at bilateral level, field visits, we can observe trials, and we can grant humanitarian visas. And also by adopting a human rights-based approach, cooperation programs can contribute to the resilience of civil society organizations and civic movements. Key actors to support in shrinking space contexts include, for example, the independent media, national human rights institutions, as well as the judiciary. But of course, the bilateral tools it's one tool we have, but we are certainly more effective if we work together with the UN and other member states. In that sense, we obviously engage also with the UN country teams on the basis of the UN Civic Space Guidance Note. And now let me come to the second challenge. The second challenge is access. We recognize that civil society actors are key stakeholders in the work of the Human Rights Council as enshrined in the institutional building package. We welcome their active participation in the plenary, but also in negotiations on draft resolutions. Since we view civil society actors as key partners, we support them throughout the work of the Council and its mechanisms, as well as with the treaty bodies. We consult them regularly on our own initiatives, such as the one on peaceful protests, or as we just witnessed now over the last few weeks during the 48th session on the question of the death penalty, or also and especially the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. You might have read about that resolution over the weekend. In the context of our own universal periodic review, we proactively involve representatives of civil society from the very beginning of the process. We examine their shadow reports to the treaty bodies with care. And this must be protected, bearing in mind that this kind of access and participation is unfortunately not yet the rule in many multilateral fora. There have been some limitations since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which will have to be addressed as a matter of priority. The shift to online meetings also, you mentioned before the impact it had for us, but it of course also had an impact on the way multilateral meetings have been handled, and especially, in the context of civil society actors, of course, through the digital tools. They have received the possibility to participate online in UN debates from wherever they are in the world. But at the same time, many of them still lack the access to secure digital technology. And then also new risks have emerged, including through expanded digital surveillance and coordinated online attacks by some states or non-state actors. So it is important that we work together, first of all, to ensure that their access to Geneva-based mechanisms is maintained. Second, to ensure that their participation remains meaningful. And third, to ensure that they remain safe and free from acts of intimidations and reprisals. Ladies and gentlemen, the program of today's conference aims precisely to look at this connectivity, both through different issues and also through different actors. And I really look forward to hearing from your proceedings once the meeting or the conference today is concluded. And of course, we welcome as Switzerland any concrete steps that might emerge from this discussion to ensure that this connectivity continues to work towards the promotion and the protection of the human rights worldwide. So thank you so much again. Thank you for inviting me today, and I wish you a very productive day today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Baumann, for those welcome remarks. I'm pleased to hand over now to the director of the Geneva Academy, Professor Gloria Gaggioli.
Dear co-panelists, dear participants, first of all, I would like to warmly thank the director of the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, Professor Salles, and also Mr. Ambassador Felix Baumann for being with us today and for having so aptly introduced this annual conference of the Geneva Human Rights Platform, also called GHRP. I'm also extremely grateful to our partner organizations ranging from the UN, the civil society, and academia, who are actively engaged in co-organizing the different panel discussions of today. A big and warm thank you also to my collaborators, Mr. Felix Kirchmeier, Executive Director of the GHRP, and also to the GHRP team, who worked hard and with a lot of passion and enthusiasm to conceptualize, organize this event, and bring together important stakeholders and renowned experts here at La Maison de la Paix and online for this hybrid event. As the director of the Geneva Academy, I have to say that it is a great pleasure to be part of this opening panel of this third annual conference of the GHRP. The two previous editions constituted important highlights in the life of the Geneva Academy, of which the Geneva platform forms part. The Geneva Academy is conceived as a hub in the hub that constitutes International Geneva. We train the human rights and humanitarian experts and leaders of tomorrow. We conduct policy research that aims at clarifying and progressively developing the law in the field that relates to the protection of individuals. And through the GHRP, we provide a neutral and dynamic forum of interaction for all stakeholders in the field of human rights to debate topical issues and challenges related to the functioning of the Geneva-based human rights system. Relying on academic research and findings, the GHRP works to enable various actors to be better connected, to break silos, and hence advance human rights. If the GHRP annual conference is so important to us, it is precisely because they allow to connect all these conferences. They bring together and seek synergies between key actors of international Geneva and human rights actors at the global, regional, and domestic levels. You will note that the first edition of the annual conference was about the connectivity between human rights mechanisms, especially in the UN human rights system. Then last year, we discussed the connectivity between regional and global human rights mechanisms. In a logical and meaningful continuum, we will focus this year on the connectivity between national human rights actors and the Geneva-based international mechanisms. So you have these three levels: global, regional, and national. So national human rights actors are key. And this is a theme that is close to our heart and on which we have been working for many years at the Geneva Academy. In January this year, our researcher, Domenico Zippoli, published an academy briefing on national human rights strategies, which precisely discusses the role of national human rights systems in the implementation of international human rights standards. Since 2015, we have been working and fostering debate on the reform of the treaty bodies system. And we incorporated reflections on the role of national human rights mechanisms. Last but not least, in collaboration with the University of Pretoria and late Professor Haynes, one of the key human rights figures of our times, we worked on the collection of data at the national level in relation to the implementation of human rights treaties. All these research projects shaped our thinking on these issues and paved the way for the present annual conference. Indeed, integrating the perspective of national human rights actors in the universal discourse on human rights is key to be able to tackle the real issues, those that have an impact on the lives of hundreds, thousands of individuals. Connecting various national human rights actors between them and with universal mechanisms is also essential to ensure compliance with international human rights recommendations at home. Having a multiplicity of universal human rights mechanisms, as Ambassador Bowman said, is obviously great, and the fact that they provide sound recommendations is certainly a significant achievement. But if we want such recommendations to have an impact and to change the lives of victims wherever they are, then national implementation is key. And this requires effective collaboration between the domestic and international levels. It is the state, indeed, which has the duty to take steps towards effective implementation of international human rights recommendations. But this duty can be better upheld in contexts where the national human rights systems are strong and well coordinated. Let me focus now on the core aspect of this conference, which is how national human rights systems can contribute to better implementation, monitoring, and follow-up to UN human rights recommendations. Every national human rights system consists of different sets of actors: governmental bodies, independent state institutions, civil society organizations. Each of them have their own designated mandate to monitor and/or implement international human rights recommendations. In a well-functioning national human rights system, both state and non-state actors play a central role in systematically engaging with international human rights mechanism throughout each reporting process entered into. Just as important is the capacity of national human rights systems to facilitate effective coordination among governmental actors, relevant independent state actors, as well as with the civil society organizations. National human rights systems can provide a platform for consultations among national actors with a view to strengthening the transparency, ownership, and accountability of monitoring and implementation processes. Very concretely, regular consultations among different stakeholders may allow for open discussions on draft reports upstream. This, in turn, can facilitate a more comprehensive and accurate provision of information on measures taken to address the issues identified by international human rights mechanisms. Coordination among different state and non-state actors in the implementation phase may increase the chances of meaningful legal and policy reforms, and in turn reflect the real needs for structural and procedural changes. Finally, effective engagement among all relevant domestic stakeholders may also address the necessary steps for adequate resource allocation towards the implementation of specific recommendations issued by the different international human rights mechanisms. As we know, every human rights treaty is part of a highly interconnected web of treaties dealing with the same or similar subject matters. Because of these overlapping treaty connections, the enforcement of one particular human rights treaty has potential repercussions on the enforcement of other human rights treaties. More broadly, the current Geneva-based human rights monitoring system is akin to a regime complex. Consequently, the establishment of a systematic multi-institutional network ensuring engagement and coordination at the national level is needed to provide effective implementation of international human rights standards. Working in silos cannot work in the current international environment. The need to connect the field or domestic realities with the international stratosphere is essential for the implementation of human rights law, and more broadly, to ensure the effectiveness of the international legal system. This is exactly what we are trying to achieve at the Academy through the work of the Geneva Human Rights Platform and through specific research projects dedicated to the implementation of international norms pertaining to the protection of individuals. I thank you for your attention and give now the floor to Mr. Kirchmeier, the Executive Director of the GHRP, who will present the program in more details. Thank you.
So thank you, Ambassador Baumann. Thank you, Professor Salles, Director of the Graduate Institute. Thank you, Professor Gaggioli, Director of the Geneva Academy, for your welcome and opening remarks to this conference. As you mentioned, I would like to say some words in particular on the planning and proceedings of the day. First, on the technical side, actually, please do note that the meeting is being recorded, both for those joining us online and those here in the room. In terms of accessibility, you already noted that we do provide closed captioning and international sign language throughout the plenary sessions, as well as in the thematic session on Building Back Better. Hybrid conferences present their own challenges, in particular in terms of the possibility of last-minute changes, as no travels are concerned. So when presenting the individual panels, we will give you the latest news and updates also on the intervention or the technical way of intervention by the speakers. Also, for those of you who are following online, the plenary sessions of the webinar, but who were maybe too late to register for the thematic sessions and the registration was closed for the afternoon, please inform the technical moderators in the chat of your choice of thematic session, and we'll allow you to join those sessions then in the afternoon. At the outset, I would like to thank my wonderful colleagues for their work in making this conference possible, and all the organizations co-organizing the various panels and the Swiss Confederation for their support. With all our partners, jointly with the Geneva Human Rights Platform, we're 25 organizations involved in this conference. And I would like to take the moment to read them all out right now. So actually thanking them, because I think we should do justice to their input to the conference. So partnering on the various panels with us are OHCHR, or UN Human Rights, as they're, I think, about to rename themselves, UNDP, UNEP, UN Habitat, the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, with whom we share a panel in their Fundamental Rights Forum, GANRI, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the Paris Human Rights Center, the Norwegian Center for Human Rights, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, the Danish Institute for Human Rights, Ciel, Earth Justice, Franciscans International, the Geneva Cities Hub, Geneva Environment Network, the Geneva Internet Platform, eMother, Euridocs, CCPR Center, International Service for Human Rights, FIAN International, Human Rights Cities, and the International Disability Alliance. I thank all of them for their collaboration. I would also like to acknowledge the presence also here in the room of members of the advisory board of the Geneva Human Rights Platform for their input and for moderating the thematic sessions later on. Connectivity is the keyword of the annual conference, as mentioned before and by the other opening speakers. In 2019, we focused on the links among different actors within the UN human rights system. In 2020, then, we looked beyond Geneva into the relations between UN and regional human rights mechanisms. This year, it's time to zoom in on the national level, the place where it matters most, where decisive action on implementation or non-implementation of the recommendations stemming from the international mechanisms is taken. Working on the best functioning of the international mechanisms, we see that finally a lot depends on the national level engagement. Engagement in reporting, in monitoring, in implementing, respecting and realizing rights. The international system works best with a functioning, coordinated national counterpart and vice versa. As we will hear from our keynote speaker, Ms. Sima Samar, there is actually little the international human rights actors can do when a national system collapses. Yet, international engagement becomes even more important in such a case, where it immediately becomes the place of last resort. After the keynote speech, we will directly move into the first plenary session, where I will be joined online actually by the speakers representing the different actors involved in the equation of national and international coordination. The second plenary panel will then discuss the digital shift and the role of new technologies towards comprehensive human rights monitoring. Afterwards, we will break for lunch, and finally, the COVID rules also allow us to offer you a light lunch in the lobby next door. Apologies here to our online participants. And then the afternoon directly starts with 4 parallel thematic sessions looking at the connectivity of national and international actors in the areas of countering systemic racism, protecting the environment, building back better with a disability inclusive way, and the role of cities in implementing international human rights obligations. After a very quick feedback from the thematic sessions into the plenary, our concluding session focuses on small states in big roles at the UN. I'm delighted that we'll have a message from the President of the General Assembly and other outstanding personalities in the room and online to debate. Ambassadors representing small island developing states, filling big roles in presiding the Human Rights Council and the Security Council. We will discuss what assuming such roles means for the connecting of the national and international levels.